Good morning, everybody. We are live here. This is Amuse News. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate everyone coming on and seeing what we're up to here. This is your destination for food news and conversation. I'm RJ. I'm the executive director of Heritage Radio Network, and I appreciate you all joining me on this journey through food. Today, I have a really exciting guest, Mark Bittman, who's a leading voice in food and has been for decades. He's written 30 books, including How to Cook Everything and Animal Vegetable Junk, among lots of others, of course. He's the editor in chief of the Bittman Project. We're going to get into that, his work and the podcast and a bunch of other stuff very shortly. And he just finished basically a worldwide, not worldwide, but a long food tour of a bunch of different countries, which I'm really excited to talk to him about. I want to tell you a few things that I've been listening to and reading. As always, if you see things that you think we should be paying attention to, you should please let us know and reach out, because I want to hear from you. But I guess I'll start by just saying, if you got to listen to last week's interview with our intern Jess Gingrich about pralines, which was we were talking about her the episode that she produced for Meat and Three about the kind of complicated history of pralines. This week, Gastropod talked about sugar, sugar's dark shadow, kind of a similar vein, but more, historical, goes deep on the history of sugar, specifically how relatively recently went from a luxury to an everyday ingredient, and how it kind of triggered, genocide and slavery and racism, and the Crusades turned Europeans onto sugar, and kind of the rest was a horrible history. But it was a really interesting listen. They also take a trip to southern Louisiana where they talk to black sugarcane farmers about kind of that history. So there's a lot of similar themes in the conversation that we had last week about pralines, but complementary as well, and more kind of global history there to think about. I want to tell you that about an article I read, Time Out's 20 Best Cities for Foodies. You better pack your bags because there's only one American city on that list. I won't spoil it, but it's not on the East Coast. Time Out surveyed thousands of people around the world, asking them their food options in their city with a focus on quality and affordability. And then the editors went through the results, including the highest scoring city for each country. So the commonality, the way Time Out describes it, is that the cities on the list are either undergoing a culinary renaissance or they're particularly buzzing right now. And they did take affordability into account as much as quality, and they were trying to look for where good quality meals are accessible to travelers on every budget. There were some surprising cities on there. Mark might tell us more about some of them. Maybe he's been to some of them, but there's a lot there. And only one from the U.S., which is probably appropriate. But so check that out. And as always, I'll put the links to these things in the show notes. In the New York Times, there's an interview with the columnist Nikita Richardson, who writes Where to Eat, which is a weekly column and newsletter where she talks about dining in New York City. So that's a little bit closer to home here, but suggestions on where to find every kind of food and how to get a table at the Impossible to Get tables at places and things like that. That was a fun thing to read and informative as well. Just a couple more things I want to tell you about. Spill and Dish, which is a podcast of the Specialty Food Association on HRN. They do a summer preview, a summer fancy food show preview, and talk with the founder of the New York City restaurant staple Una Pizza Napolitana, and talk a little bit about the show. I'm going to be at the fancy food show in New York. If you're going to be there, let me know. Would love to meet up. I'm doing a couple interviews, and I will be meeting some people there. So if you're going, let me know. The last thing is there is a new episode of Meat and Three called Identity Crisis, Authenticity in a Changing Food Landscape. And as I've described multiple times, our interns are amazing, and they work on these really great projects where they kind of come up with these ideas and then figure out how to build an episode. This is about this idea of authenticity and whether it's as important as we seem to think it is. They talk about biotech influence on traditional cuisine, personal reflections from international chefs, and the bounds of authenticity's usefulness as a concept. It's a really fun listen, and these interns who are working on this and the people from HRN, Taylor, H, Armin, all the rest of the team are extremely smart and really think really carefully and thoughtfully about this stuff. So you should check out Meat and Three if you haven't already. So those are my plugs for today, and I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to bring on Mark Bittman. All right, Mark, how are you?
Ready when you are. Good.
Mark, I'm going to dive right in because I think most people know a little bit about your history, if not more. But I was really interested to, and again, I appreciate you coming on and talking. I know you just got back from a big trip and have a lot going on, so appreciate your time.
Happy to be here.
On your website, Bittman Project, you say that you wrote about cooking, mostly about cooking and its pleasures, and that this evolved like while you were at the New York Times, and that your focus evolved to like focusing more on impact that food has on humans and kind of the stuff that we talk about at HRN: agriculture, environment, public health, labor, racism, justice. I'm just curious, as a food writer who you said wrote about cooking and its pleasures, how did that evolution start? And was that uncommon at the time to for a food writer to kind of start thinking about these issues more carefully?
I mean, it's a complicated story that could take a long time to tell because I began my writing career writing for a community newspaper that was a newspaper for community organizers to support the work of community organizers in Somerville, Mass, in the
Mhm.
70s, and we were working on rent control, women's health issues, anti-racism, some of the very same issues that progressives are working on now. Um, and then through a bunch of quirks and the way life is, I became a food writer. And there weren't a lot of food writers in those days. It wasn't like now. And so in the 80s and into the 90s, I was interviewing people, writing about their cooking, cooking with other people, doing my own cooking, started to write cookbooks, started to write for the Times. Um, I'm trying to summarize 20
Yeah,
years in
yeah,
a second.
yeah.
It's not easy. But then How to Cook Everything came out in 1998, and the natural follow-up book to How to Cook Everything seemed to be How to Cook Everything Vegetarian. And
Hmm.
And why was that? And I think that was because this sort of writing was starting to be on the wall, that the way we had the way that we had gradually turned to this dominant awful American diet in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all the negative impact of that was becoming clear, and that it was unsustainable to be producing meat at the way we were producing. It was especially unsustainable to expect to be able to have the rest of the world eat the meat the way that Americans and British and Australians, mostly English speaking countries, did. We were going to have to eat more plants. We were going to have to take advantage of plant protein and so on and so on. And that led me to think about eating and health in general, eating and the environment in general, and then not long thereafter, eating and climate change, agriculture and climate change. And this is like a gradual shift, but it's a huge one. It brought me in by say 2005 to where we're at today. I mean, not as sophisticated as where our thinking is now, but
Hmm.
and the Times wasn't interested in me writing about, or the food section of the Times wasn't interested in me. And by this time, I was a columnist. I was writing the minimalist column, and I
Hmm. Hmm.
published How to Cook Everything Vegetarian and a bunch of other books. By this time, I was reasonably successful. I mean, having a weekly column in the Times obviously is
Yeah.
a pretty good definition of success.
Yeah.
Um, but the food section wasn't interested in this stuff. The Times, however, at that time was very supportive of internal people, of family. And so I went to other editors, higher up editors, or editors in different sections, and I was steered toward the Week in Review section. And basically, people said, look, if you want to write about food and climate change, or you want to write about aquaculture and what's wrong with it, or you want to write about industrial production of meat, this is the place to do it. So I started
Mm.
writing for Week in Review. And after 2 or 3 years of that, and Week in Review became Sunday Review at the same time, or during that period. And after 2 or 3 years of that, I convinced that editor to let me write a weekly column about food, which I did from 2010 to 2015, more or less. And that's when I left the Times and wrote Animal Vegetable Junk and struck out on this wacky path that I'm on by myself now. But that's sort of the story.
I'm just curious, like when you were going through, and it does sound like a pretty serious evolution, just in terms of the traditional path at the time. It sounds like you kind of like were pushing off that path. Were you having conversations with other, I don't know, food writers and people like you, like about these issues, or did you feel like you were kind of alone out there thinking about this as it relates to kind of mass food content consumption?
Well, let's say I had been in one group of food writers, which is sort of the what my friend Doc used to call famous food writers, FFWs, and that was, the my peers, the people my age, Ruth Reichel, Dory Greenspan, Coleman Andrews. I don't know, sort of the old. If you think about older New York based,
Yeah.
that's the crowd I was in. But when I started, or professionally, that's the crowd I was in. When I started writing the more policy-based stuff, the more international-based stuff, I started making different friends. And some of those people were people who came to food through policy as
Mm,
opposed to coming through food through cooking. So they were different kinds of people. And I want to say one other thing, which is that when I referred to myself as one of this old bunch of older groups of food writers, I'm talking about people who are now in their 70s. But at that time, let's say I was in my 50s, um, I was meeting people who were in their 30s, even 20s, who had grown up in the food movement,
mm,
who had grown up thinking about local food, who'd grown up reading Omnivore's Dilemma, reading Fast Food Nation, reading Diet for a Small Planet, and had a much more internal grounding in the politics of food than I did, because I
mm.
came to it from this kind of roundabout, long route. And I'm not being self-critical, nothing wrong with that. But other people had it like in their blood in a way that I didn't. And they were, for the large part, respectful of me because I had a long career and I had a name and blah, blah, blah. But I was amazed by them because they just knew stuff in a way that they were, they had stuff in, like I said, in their blood that I was really just kind of latching onto. So there was this professional transition of like, who do I talk to every day? And
Yeah.
it started to be people 10 and 20 and 30 years younger than me instead of people who were my age. So um, that's just the way it happened. That wasn't
Yeah.
intentional, but and this, of course, there are people my age who have great views on food and do great food writing and so on. But there is this kind of, now I'm working almost daily with people in their, let's say they're between 25 and 50 years old and not older than that. And they all have a sort of better, mm, they're more natural about the synthesis of food and equity and the sort of DEI movement. And to me, it takes a little more thinking through. To them, it's like second nature. So I just, I learn a lot from those people every day.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I mentioned our interns, and we have cohorts of interns every year that come through HRN and learn how to, make podcasts and all that. And I've been so impressed with that aspect of the people who are coming through. It all seems very second nature in a way that I'm not a food systems expert, but I'm a progressive, and I've grown up in the advocacy world. But just the way that it becomes, the way that food and food systems are tied into social justice and racism is second nature to people. And I'm in my mid 40s, so I feel very much like the next generation gets it even more naturally than I got progressive politics in when I was 20, working on
Right,
campaigns. It's really
right.
interesting. Um, so is your daughter one of those people? I mean, I know she's one of the people that you work with, but was she one of these people who had this kind of perspective on food, or did that come separately?
Oh, for her, it's different because she was really interested, I think, more interested in books and um, books in general, and came to food in part because of me, and in part through doing cookbook publicity
Mm, mhm.
20 years ago. So her route is, yeah, I mean, everybody has their own route, right? So
Yeah.
hers is a little different.
Can you? Yeah, I'm just curious. I have 3 young kids, and I can't even imagine my kids as adults. But how's that journey been? And for people who don't know, you work with your daughter on Bittman Project, and she's a co-host of the podcast. And just sort of what have you learned from that collaboration?
I think, I mean, there is this sort of joke, which is that it's better to give money to your kids than to anybody else because, after all, it stays in the family. But I don't know. Kate started working with me very slowly, and it was quite natural. She was actually assigned to do publicity for a book. I can't remember which one, for a cookbook. And then she gradually took over doing publicity for all the cookbooks that I was doing, all the books that I was doing. And then she left. She was at Scribner and she left and went to work for Martha Stewart and then the New Yorker for a while. And then she decided to freelance and do PR and social stuff. And then she decided, why not just do this stuff? Go to work with
Yeah,
me and see what happened. And there was a period of some transition, but then we figured out, and this started to happen as I was leaving the Times. We figured out, well, let's try to do some publication that we're doing together that is really independent, and let's see how it develops. And we've been working on it for, I'd say we started in 2016, so it's 8 years now. But when we've been independent, first we were with, I can't even remember, but then we were with Medium, and then we were Substack, and now we've been independent on our own for a couple of years, and it's going really well. I mean, we're supporting a couple of people, and we're growing, not shrinking. And if we can grow a little more, it'll be astonishingly successful, and be really happy about it. But the podcast is fun. The publication is great. I've been trying to write weekly, which is something I hadn't done since I left the Times, and really enjoying that. You mentioned my travels, and I was writing about those every week. Uh, but Kate's writing more. We sort of have some of the old usual suspects writing for us, but we're bringing in new people all the time too, and trying to keep up with the multimedia world and so on. There's a lot of challenges, but it's really fun. And we're the ones who are figuring everything out. Like, no one tells us what to do. So that's
yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool. um, and so tell me about the travels because I know I think I approached you while during the travels because I was reading, some of these kind of just the summaries of Japan, I think, but you went multi-month, right? Japan, India, Greece, Morocco. Was this like a long planned out food specific trip, and what were you hoping to like get out of it, or was it just like let's travel the world?
Well, my partner runs a food nonprofit called Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. We live here. It's up in Putnam County. And her name is Kathleen Finley. And she has been here for 12 years, I think, maybe 14, and asked for and negotiated a 3-month sabbatical, with the understanding that there'd be a lot of food involved in the travel. So we figured out where we wanted to go, where people thought we should go, where we got invited to go. Wasn't, there was one small part of the trip that was meant to be a kind of relaxing break in the middle. But everybody says you got to go to Japan, and so we spent a month in Japan, and we did see some uh, amazing food stuff, interesting production. A lot of traditional a lot of traditional things that were fascinating. And we spent 2 weeks in the country in Japan and weeks in Kyoto and Tokyo. The part when we were in the country was really something. And then we were invited to Northeast India, the part of India that's kind of separate from the mainland. It's over near Nepal, Bhutan, and very close to Bangladesh. And we stayed with friends, and we learned a lot about that particular small area of Meghalaya, which is called the Khasi Hills. The people are the Khasis, the tribal people, but there are many tribes, and that food is not Indian food, and it's influenced by Indian and Burmese and Thai and Bangladeshi Muslim food, and even Nepalese and Bhutan food. So it's a odd or unusual kind of cooking with ingredients, many ingredients you just never. We had ingredients no one, even the people we were with, hadn't seen these ingredients before. Because
Crazy.
there's a lot of foraging and um, a lot of seed saving and a lot of growing of crops that have been grown for hundreds or thousands of years that just haven't made it out of there. Um, so that was amazing. And then we spent a few days in Delhi, which was really fun. And I'm glad we went then when it was 80 degrees out instead of now when it's 120 there. And then we went to Greece, which was the sort of vacation part of the trip, and ate fish on the beach and hiked and drove around and saw beautiful things. And then we went to Morocco, which was as compelling and interesting as India and Japan, and a little bit more grueling. We drove around a lot. We sort of
Mm.
moved every 3 days for 3 weeks. Um, so it was a little hit and miss. Some places were more fun or more interesting than others, but we did a bunch of hiking, some really beautiful places, and we ate a lot of tagines, of course, but ate some other food that was pretty interesting. I learned a lot, especially about Moroccan bread and pastry, about which I knew almost nothing.
Mm.
Yeah, and then we came home, and here 3 months later, and here it is. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
So it took like a day to get used to being home.
Right. I'm sure, and I want people to know that we'll link to your site. I mean, you write a lot of articles on your site about the travel and about the food and the places you've seen. I'm just curious if there's any like one or two takeaways just from the Japan part, just things that you didn't know before, didn't expect, or surprising things that you learned from the food journey there.
You know, it's first of all, I think one thing I learned about this trip is that you can't judge anything based on a short visit. And almost
Mm.
all of our visits were short. So anything I say about Japan has just got to be taken not too seriously. Because so I spent 4 weeks in Japan and I looked at food. Big deal. It doesn't make me an expert. I mean, I can write an article. I felt like the style of cooking that we were being frequently offered. And again, we were seen as tourists or seen as guests, and I think people wanted to treat us specially. We went to yakitori restaurants. We went to places where we went to bars and ate sort of normal food. But when we were being presented food by people, we were often being given kaiseki meals, which would start with a plate or a bunch of boxes of 12 or 16 things, and then
Mm.
those would go
Mhm.
away and another 5 or 8 things would come out, and then those would go away and a couple other things would come out, and da da da. And I've liked this for a while, but it really reinforced my feeling that I don't like to eat that way. I like to eat a few things,
Yeah.
I like a simple meal that tastes really good. I don't like to sit there trying 16 things one after
Yeah.
the other. And then if there's
Yeah.
something you really like and you've only got one bite of it, I feel deprived. So that was, but having said that, for taking care of ingredients, for presenting things in an amazing way, for paying attention to what's been traditional and what's been around in their world for hundreds or thousands of years, and to preserve the ways of cooking them and pickling them and drying them. And uh, the Japanese have it nailed. I mean, it's really not like any place else. They have infrastructure nailed also, and they have cooperative society better nailed than any place I've ever been. And they have plumbing nailed. They have a few things nailed.
That's cool. I mean, that sounds like, and like I said, you've written extensively about all this on the site, but that's cool. Thanks for kind of summarizing that. The last question I had is just, as your career, which we tried to summarize in 20 minutes, but probably missed a lot.
Yeah.
I know that you're kind of focused on, with the site, curating content that's brings in different voices and kind of serves some of these missions that you talked about earlier, or some of the issue areas. Um, how is that now in like a rapidly changing media environment? Like, do you feel like this current, you mentioned Substack, like there's so many different iterations of you mentioned Medium, and now you're here as a kind of an independent site. I'm just curious, like how that is going in terms of being giving you the freedom maybe to kind of like curate things more, or just how's it going generally as all this stuff changes constantly.
It's a juggling act. We have a limited budget, so we're trying to do stuff ourselves or yeah, generate our own material. But to the extent that we can attract new people, we do. We've had a little bit of, attracting people, them writing for us for a little while, and then them going off and finding someone else to write for. I mean, I did that for years, so I can't complain about that. But we've also attracted some talent that's staying around, and we have a core of maybe 6 or 7 people who are pretty well, not bound to us, but part of what I feel like is a loose team, and
Hmm.
that's taken a while, and that's a good thing. There's economics here. How much can
Yeah.
we pay people, and how much can we make, and how much are we willing to sell out? Because for years, Kate and I were real hard asses about what we would take for an advertiser if and now we're probably a little, all right, well, it's not poison. We'll let them advertise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's a balance that anyone with principles who takes external money is going to have to find for themselves. So it's fun. It's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's really cool to watch just these and just to hear and read about your career and how you've kind of like gone from, the pinnacle of food journalism, and then you've kind of like taken your own path to try and probably address things that you care about more, which is an admirable task, and it seems like it's still creating content and people are having fun. So like,
Yeah, it's
that's a
another
success.
pinnacle. It's a
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything that you're any food, either meal, recipe, anything that you're like particularly obsessed with at the moment?
um, yeah, I am interested in I'm interested in doing a better job with Japanese pickles
Mm,
than I did before I left. I'm more interested in doing that stuff. There are a couple dishes from India that from Meghalaya particularly that I'd really like to master and make public. And yeah, the Moroccan bread and dessert thing is we had some just amazing pastries in Morocco, the best pastries I've had in a long time. So that stuff occupies me. I'd feel silly not mentioning Community Kitchen, which is this nonprofit restaurant project I've been working on, just not because I want to talk about it for half an hour because you want me to, but just because it is occupying a lot of my time, and
mm,
I'm associated with it and I'm working hard on it, um, among other things, obviously. And it's been something that's been a bit of a passion project for 3 going on 4 years, and now there's a small team working on that, and we're making progress on that too. So, I would have felt bad letting that opportunity to say that go by, and you can edit it out if you want
no,
to.
no, no, we're good. And I know that you wrote, I think you wrote a piece on the site about it, so we can link to that so people can read more about
Right,
it.
there's a Guardian piece about it also.
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome. That's great. Thank you for mentioning it. We're just here to if this like helps raise awareness of good food projects, then I'm all for it. So,
Me too,
um,
so good.
I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope we can talk again soon. This is
Anytime you
fun.
like, just like what you just said, if it's good for the cause, I'm in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and
All right.
and talk to you soon. And for everyone else listening, thank you. We'll be back early next week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye, RJ.
Bye bye.